security is kind of getting harder and harder no matter the channel for procurement. The requirements are pretty high. Everybody is risk averse. There's a new attack vector every day. And so security is a thing that tends to stay relatively slow. And as a vendor, you still have to do all the things you need to do to prove that you're building secure software and delivering secure software. And so it's probably not the area that gets sped up the most.
Hi, friends. Welcome to the Sales Enablement Podcast. I'm your host, Andy Paul. Now, that was Don Addington. Don's the Chief Revenue Officer at Tackle.io, a cloud marketplace platform. And in our conversation, we talk about how software companies are changing how they sell their products through cloud marketplaces. Now, we start off with Don sharing with us a description of what cloud marketplaces are and how they function. And then we dive into the reasons why software companies really need to consider selling on a cloud marketplace. And not the least of which is Don shares data that 83% of buyers are likely or extremely likely to purchase through these same cloud marketplaces. So then we dig into the 10 things that sellers need to be aware of when selling in a cloud marketplace and how it's different and how it can transform the way they sell. So we get into all of this and much, much more. But before we get to Don, I want to remind you to subscribe to this podcast wherever you listen to it. And if you subscribe, we'd certainly appreciate it if you could leave us a review and give us your feedback about how we're doing. So thank you very much. All right, let's jump into it. Don, welcome to the show.
Hey, Eddie. Thanks for having me.
A pleasure to have you. So where are you joining us from?
I am in Bend, Oregon.
Love Bend.
Yeah.
Who doesn't, right?
Who doesn't? Everybody I talk to has a similar reaction. I couldn't find Bend on a map 3 years ago, or or anything. So we ended up here kind of fortuitously, and just love it.
So, yeah, I know you came from a more urban area. Have you picked up any new sort of outdoory type pursuits or activities or hobbies? Yeah,
it's funny. So I've got a couple kids, and my son's about to be a teenager. My daughter's about 9 years old, and we moved here from Atlanta, and they've both picked up pursuits that, of course, now my wife and I have picked up. So my daughter started horseback riding, and not many places to do that in Atlanta, right, without getting in trouble. And so my wife actually started. She's taken my daughter all the time, so she picked up riding. So now I got them riding, and my son's got me skiing, and we're 15 minutes away from the 6th largest ski resort in the United States, and so
Bachelor or Hood?
It's Bachelor, yeah.
Bachelor, right.
So which again I never really even knew about it. So yeah, we're up skiing every weekend, and it's about to turn into mountain biking season here, and things that I didn't do consistently, at least historically. So it's been a ton of fun.
Yeah. Well, plus you can take your mountain bikes up on the lifts off season, right? And ride down.
You can. I didn't know you could do that.
Yeah.
And it's also rather frightening because these mountains are all volcanic. And so the terrain is pretty dicey. And when you don't know what you're doing, heading down, a black diamond run on a mountain bike is pretty dicey. But when your 12-year-old son is leading the way, you're like, hey, man, if he can do it.
Well, no, that's probably the lesson. If he can do it, I probably shouldn't. So, yeah.
That's right. He heals a lot faster, for sure.
So tell us a little bit about yourself. Tell us a little bit about Tackle.io.
Yeah, sure. It's funny, work becomes sort of inextricable from self after a while. So I think the backstory on me is probably helpful for Tackle too. I'm a career software seller. I come from, it was not my intent. And I think as a lot of people that you talk to in sales, that's a pretty familiar refrain is, hey, I never thought
I fell into it. Yeah.
I never thought I was going to do this, but my dad was in software his entire career, and just something that I ended up getting into unintentionally, and grew up selling in the security space, and so internet security systems in Atlanta, was my first job selling software, and I realized, hey, like this is. I get to talk to people, I get to meet new people, I get to learn a lot of different things, and this is interesting. Let's go a little bit farther. And so I'd say about 15-ish or more. I don't know, year. I haven't read my own LinkedIn lately, but somewhere around there in the security space. And then, security, even though it's a super hot market and, a ton of companies doing well there and everything, for me, I was like, it's kind of the same words and the same stories and the same stuff, for 15 years. And so got into Pivotal and started working in application development and platforms. And that eventually led me to work with the team here at Tackle. And so Tackle was one of my friends, John Yonke, who's our CEO. He and I were at Pivotal together, and he left and came to this company called Tackle. And I remember, you do what you do. I Googled it up. I looked at the website. I had no idea what they did. It was, said cloud marketplaces. I couldn't spell marketplace. I didn't know what they were doing. And it was like, 3 or 4 people here at the time. So it was about a year later, maybe a little less. And John and I ended up talking. And so he explained to me, kind of what was going on here, what the company did, what cloud marketplaces are. And it was a pretty compelling story because it was really centering around helping sellers sell. And that's something I can get behind. So, that's not quite yet to the what is Tackle, but, that's kind of how I got to Tackle. What was compelling to me was, hey, they're engaging in this space that not a lot of people knew about. And it looked like it might be a path to helping software sellers sell more. And so that was really interesting to me.
Okay. So we're going to dive into that because I think there's a lot of people still don't understand what cloud marketplaces are. I was talking to a CEO of a SaaS company not that long ago, did not know what it was. So explain a cloud marketplace, and then we'll get into, let's follow that up then with how it helps people sell more software.
Sure. I think and marketplace is a very broad term, right? And marketplaces, ecosystems, those very, very hot topics today and important avenues to sell that in a lot of ways didn't exist certainly 10 years ago, but the level of maturity even 5 years ago wasn't great. But when we talk about, just to frame the conversation, when I talk about cloud marketplaces, we're talking about the marketplaces that are attached to the hyperscaler cloud providers like AWS, like Azure, like GCP, like Red Hat. They all have these fairly broad marketplaces that, as a buyer, you can go purchase software, deploy software, in the tenants that you're running in those cloud providers. You can, buy SaaS solutions through these marketplaces. And the real draw, and everything great starts with where are the buyers, right? When you're a seller. So the real draw is, as cloud has become more and more important to really everybody on the face of the planet, but certainly B2B, organizations, enterprises, small, medium businesses, cloud has become super important. And dollars are flowing to cloud. And so from a software provider perspective, all of a sudden, if I look at my target market and I'm selling to, Home Depot and Walmart and retail, I'm going to start looking at, Google's cloud marketplace. They have a ton of retail customers that dedicate tons of their budget to spend with GCP. And they can use that budget and those dollars to source software through those marketplaces. So in a lot of ways, these cloud marketplaces are distribution for the cloud era, right? So whereas before it was multi-tier, reseller, distributor relationship, the cloud marketplaces are really sort of the distribution tier of today.
So I think for people listening, it's maybe the analogy to some degree to Salesforce's App Exchange.
Sure, and that's a good example of a marketplace. I think what you find in the AWSs and Azures and GCPs of the world is I would say first think of kind of fulfillment. And so if you look today, the inventory there is pretty great. You want to go buy HashiCorp, you want to go buy some software from McAfee, you want to go buy a security solution from Lacework. You look in these marketplaces and there's offerings from each of those providers there. What's compelling is, as a seller, I can really follow a direct sales motion with my prospect and find out what's the most advantageous route for you to purchase my software. Is it as part of your AWS bill? Is it through a reseller? Is it by going with me direct? And increasingly, the buyers are saying, hey, if I could get you on my AWS bill, I've got a ton of budget that's dedicated to AWS, and my process to procure you can go faster. It's a pre-existing bill. So it's really a way to do a custom deal for a software seller and just fulfill it through an AWS, an Azure, a GCP, a Red Hat, what have you.
So in that case, from a sales standpoint, since somebody's qualified to be listed on an AWS marketplace, and from a procurement standpoint, you're not doing a separate procurement for this application.
That's right, and even so, you still have a relationship with that software provider. So let's use a specific example, right? If I'm Home Depot buying from a software company on the GCP marketplace, I'm still gonna buy the software from that provider. It's gonna show up on my GCP bill. And what that allows is, what don't I have to do? Well, I don't have to cut a check to the software provider.
Right.
I'm going to get a bill from GCP. That bill already exists. So just not even having to set that buyer up in your procurement system, or get set up in that buyer's procurement system.
Sure.
That shortens the cycle. There's a dozen little things like that add up to be quite big things that help to sell faster. Legal contracts, there's some common contracts you can use and things like that help to speed up the sale process.
Well, and also, let's say from a excuse me, voice is suffering a little bit today. So from a security review aspect as well, does that mitigate some of the time that your IT would have to spend approving a vendor?
Some of it, yes. And I think if you look at some of these providers, Tackle's one of them. We list our software on all the marketplaces, and for example, with AWS, they've got, well-architected, architecture reviews that you can go through and say, hey, we passed these, like, here's our validation. I'd say, there are things that get sped up easier than others. Security is kind of getting harder and harder, no matter the channel for procurement.
Right.
The requirements are pretty high. Everybody is risk averse. There's a new attack vector every day. And so, security is a thing that tends to stay relatively slow. And as a vendor, you still have to do, all the things you need to do to prove that you're building secure software and delivering secure software. And so it's probably not the area that gets sped up the most. I would think things around vendor management, things around contracts and legal, and then opening up the doors to budget that, frankly, might not have been available to you unless you were going through that cloud.
Yeah, I mean, it sort of reminds me of, of defense procurement to some degree. If you've ever sold to DoD, is you need to have a contract, right? There has to be, the contract means there's budget assigned to it. So a lot of times in the past with companies that have been at, we're looking for a contract vehicle.
Yeah, totally.
Equivalent.
Yep. And as a seller, to go back to that lens, I want to figure out the fastest way I can get purchased and the easiest way I can get purchased, and where can I get the most budget? Right. And increasingly, the answer to that question is, by going through these marketplaces.
And I think increasingly too, as more companies go to a consumption-based model, it seems like marketplaces become a better way to go, perhaps.
100%. I mean, I think the tagline that we use a lot here at Tackle is sort of meet your buyer where their wallet is at, and that's step one, right? I've got a bunch of budget dedicated there. Like, hey, go locate yourself close to the money. That's number one. But for these software providers, it's not just flip a switch and I get my software on the digital shelf. There's integration work to be done. Metering and consumption-based stuff is a really great example of something that each one of these cloud providers has different requirements for that. So if you try to kind of go do that on your own as a software company, all of a sudden you find yourself farther and farther away from your core business. Your core business is, let's build great products for our customers and extend our reach and our NRR and all those great things, and not spend time on the things that aren't germane to our business. And you can get wrapped up in writing to 4 different cloud providers, metering APIs, if you kind of go this on your own. And that's where Tackle really came into the picture, was let's make this connection to the marketplaces easy. Let's demystify how to sell, and let's help you scale operationally, because all those things absent a Tackle can be really, really difficult in one marketplace and almost impossible across, 3 or 4 of them.
Well, so let's talk about that. So talk about what you do from an integration standpoint to help software companies.
Sure. And, it's interesting. I think you and I were chatting a little bit. I started with Tackle, 3 years ago. We had maybe 7 to 10 customers when I started. I think 10 is probably gratuitous. And we've scaled up to about 400 customers today. So we have customers of all shapes and sizes, startups that you haven't heard of yet, really large companies like the VMwares and Dells of the world, some very engineering forward companies like you take a HashiCorp or somebody like that. And so all of them have great talent. All of them have great capability. It's just where are you going to use that talent and capability. And what Tackle's done is build, think about it as really almost an abstraction layer in between the software provider and these cloud marketplaces. And what we say is we start with a no-code approach. Without Tackle, you got to find an engineer, you got to find a product person, you got to figure out how to get your product onto the shelf, then you got to manage, maintain, and figure out how to scale that operationally. Right. With Tackle, we say, hey, here's our platform. Our platform is going to plug in and do all those things for you, so you don't have to create experts in the machinery of marketplace. Right. You can be a beneficiary of marketplace and then focus on how do you drive revenue. And that's really where we want to get to. Like almost kind of the boring and mundane stuff is, how do I get my product on the shelf? But the thing about most things that are boring and mundane is there's a lot of complexity behind them. Right.
But absolutely necessary. Yeah. So, it's a good way to to think about it too, is shelf space. So what's it cost or what's the process for a company? Even a question before that. Is there a specific category of software that's more suitable for the cloud marketplaces, or is it virtually any SaaS type product?
Yeah, and that's a really interesting question. The simple questions usually are, right? So there's a historical component to that question that says, really these cloud marketplaces sprung up to cater to the users of these, of these cloud environments. So what I mean by that is I'm a developer. I've spun up a VM on AWS because it's faster. I don't have to go through all my corporate red tape. So all of a sudden you got a bunch of developers hanging around building stuff in AWS. And, AWS wants to keep them there. So make it easy for them to get the tools they want to use. And so the marketplace has really started as a way for software companies to get close to the people who are using the software. And so you would find a lot of consumption-based tools there, a lot of DevOps-based tools, anything that a developer would want to kind of get their hands on. That was kind of the early inventory, if you will. What's been the interesting sort of evolution of these marketplaces is, it's moved from a search, find, try, and buy to more of a fulfillment model where you can kind of find anything and everything. And what we're finding is, the purchase power for software lives outside of the users of that software, right? So you look at strategic sourcing, the office of the CIO, and these are the groups that are signing large committed spend multi-year agreements with AWS and GCP and Azure. And so, because the software you buy through these marketplaces can help you meet those commitments that you've made to spend with those cloud providers, now all of a sudden the strategic sourcing people are like, wait a minute, can't we source all of our software this way? Because that's great benefit to me. Now I'm managing one vendor. Now I'm able to commit to maybe more spend with the cloud provider, get a more advantageous financial relationship with them, and get the software I was already using. So the answer to your question is really all types of software now get sold through the marketplace, where I couldn't really say that genuinely 5 years ago. I'd say, it's a good place if you're selling to developers. Now it really doesn't matter who your user is. You want to take a look at who's the company you're selling to, and do they have a strategic relationship with one of these cloud providers? And if they do, then you should be talking about, is this a way you might want to purchase us?
Yeah. Interesting. No, this is fascinating. So from a cost to get on a marketplace, and there's, you talk about in your guys' literature, public and private listing. So talk about that, this process of how you get yourself listed, and then, how you make yourself known or seen, let's say.
Yeah, and some of this is, again, I'll go back to like the historicals here, like the perception in the early days, and really the reality probably in the early days, was I'm going to put up a listing, that's my billboard. I'm going to somehow drive people to that billboard. And the ideal was, hey, the cloud provider should be driving people to that billboard. And then, that listing should be easy enough for somebody to just click a button and buy and start using your software. That use case exists, and that's called a public listing, and that's basically an organic search, find, try, buy process.
Catalog, basically.
That's exactly. And while a large volume of transactions happen that way, the largest portion of the revenue that goes through these marketplaces today happens through what's called private offers. And private offers are really a way to do a custom deal between the software provider and the buyer, where you can negotiate price, you can negotiate contract terms and conditions. You can really treat it like fulfillment for a direct deal. And that is how most of the business is happening, is really an extension of a direct deal almost. So when you hear like public and private offerings, people are usually talking about, well, we do most of our business off of our private offers. Private offers exist as sort of think about it as like the back end of a public facing listing, where you can build a private offer really custom to an individual buyer. And so the first step on all these marketplaces is you got to have something that faces public, but it doesn't have to be software that is click and boom, you're spinning and deployed and using. It can really be almost any software. So you can almost think about it as like, hey, for that software that makes sense for me to click a button and spin up in a tenant, great. But if I'm a SaaS provider that has an implementation process, my buyer just wants the financial advantage of purchasing my software on a contract with AWS that already exists. And then I'm going to take them through getting the software implemented just like I would with a normal,
sales process
contract, right? So that's what when we talk about, public and private offers. So most of our customers, all of our customers are doing business that's private offer centric like that. And then some subset of our customers are doing business that they've got a product led growth approach, for example, or they've got a bottoms up approach, and people
transactional
and buy it, and it's transactional. You can do that, off of a similar type of listing. So that's what just wanted to make sure we kind of clarify what is.
No, I think that's a good distinction though. Is the public listing is basically self-service implementation, like a product led growth example. Very transactional, whereas your private listing, your private offers, for a lot of SaaS companies, that's sort of their prototypical sales process.
It's the bread and butter
built through the marketplace.
Yep, and I think that's the notion that we often Tackle comes in as a company, and I think we're really the only company in the world who understands all of these marketplaces and how to operate across all these marketplaces. They all have different rules. Your public listing has to look like this on one. It needs to look like that on the other one. There's all these different kind of things that when you talk about what's the investment that I need to make as a software company to figure out how to build that listing, comply with all the rules of each one of the cloud providers just to get to selling, that's a lot of the complexity that Tackle takes out of the picture. And also, sitting down and talking with our customers through like, hey, how do you want to sell? What do your deals look like? And there's a method to the madness there that says once we know who you're targeting, how you want to sell, what your deals look like, we can overlay that with the rules of marketplace and create the listing strategy that's going to allow you to sell the way you want to sell. Absent Tackle, there's a bunch of dark corners you can kind of go down and build the wrong thing, and then you get time to go do a deal with a customer and you can't. So that's a lot of the complexity that Tackle takes out of the picture.
Yeah, I think it's just, as you talked about up front, it's an option for companies really to explore, and let's say SaaS companies, is, find where the money is, exactly, existing contract, makes it easier for internal approvals, I would think, for this, right? Because, hey, we've got an existing contract. We're sort of leveraging on that. So certainly, I could see, and that's funny, I don't hear many companies talk about this, is, what's our ICP look like? Mm-hmm. Hell, I'd get somebody and put them on companies that are, must be on a marketplace.
Well, I think that it goes back to, ease of procurement is a killer feature.
Yeah, absolutely.
And if I'm a salesperson, which I am, again, I'm looking for the fastest path to getting a deal done and the biggest budget I can tap into. And so in the selling process, where this fits in is really just adding some discovery questions to your process if I'm a seller. And early on in the process, finding out if you're selling to, it doesn't matter, XYZ company, hey, do you guys have any strategic relationships with the large cloud providers? You might be selling business software to a marketing person who's like, I know we do a bunch of stuff with AWS, but why are you asking me that question?
Yeah, I have no idea, right?
I would invite that response, because then you're in a seat of saying like, hey, a lot of our customers are finding it faster and they're finding more budget available to them to procure us through this channel. So I'm going to assume that you're going to want to buy us at some point in time. Like this is one of those ways that you might be able to do that. Now you might have actually turned on your marketing buyer to, oh, I'm going to go talk to my IT people or my strategic sourcing people and find out, hey, can I tap into that budget over there? Right?
Oh yeah.
It's a pretty cool, it's a pretty cool sales hack.
Oh, I think so too. I think as there's some companies, for instance, selling into the sales space where they're native in Salesforce, right? Written native in Salesforce. Well, your first qualification is you do run Salesforce, right? If you run Salesforce, you're not a prospect. Theoretically, somebody could give somebody the assignment to say, the second question you're asking is, are you on AWS, GCP, or whatever? And if they're not, maybe it gets turned over to a different rep. You're just looking for the ones that are on the marketplace or, in that ecosystem.
Yeah, there's, definitely all different kinds of ways to do it. We've seen, and I think this goes back to what we started talking about, kind of earlier, is this convergence of partnerships, ecosystems, like it's all in service of, meeting your customer where they're at and doing business the way that is most advantageous to them. And marketplace isn't the answer for every single deal all the time. But if you're not tapping into it as an option, you're missing out. And I would think about it too on that's the front end of customer acquisition.
Right.
If you think about it, some of our providers do a healthy amount of business on renewals. So they may have transacted directly with their buyer for their initial purchase or purchases. And that buyer comes back and says, hey, I got my budget cut, or hey, I'd like to buy more, but I don't have enough budget. And being able to leverage your cloud budget, that buyer didn't even know it was available. And you're like, hey, well, if we put this all on your GCP bill, that rolls up under cloud budget. And we've seen a ton of, kind of diving saves from that perspective or abilities to expand that otherwise would not have existed.
Yeah, so there's some of the implication of what you're saying when you say, well, we'll roll up into, AWS budget, is that those are fairly a lot of wiggle room in those budgets when they're given each year?
They're pretty fluid. You may or may not be surprised. We've both been around software sales for a long time, and it's the dollars that get allocated to these large cloud providers are typically not accounted for by the penny. What you're doing is taking a look at, hey, what is my run rate historically been? What do I think my growth is going to be? And then I'm going to commit to a number, and it's usually over a period of 3 years. And fulfilling that commitment, it isn't usually tied to, it can be, but it's not necessarily tied to any one particular group. Those budget dollars can be made available, and, smart buyers know how to work in their own organizations and say, hey, if I bought this software directly, it's a marketing tool. If I buy it on my AWS bill, it's part of cloud spend, and during the pandemic, we actually saw that. Early days in the pandemic, here's what we saw. A lot of buyers saying, hold on, everybody just got sent home. And legal and sourcing and procurement don't work well together when they're in the same damn office. And now you just send them all home. No new vendors. We're not onboarding any new vendors, right?
Right.
We saw a ton of that. And the smart software companies who didn't want to get their cycles disrupted said, well, what if I could land on an existing bill? Mm-hmm. And what if I was counting against cloud budget, which really the only budgets that grew, in those early, 6 months of the pandemic were cloud budgets.
Yeah.
And work productivity, right?
Right.
Work productivity tools, cloud budgets, security. Those three, they got all the cash. And so now I'm like, hey, this is cloud spend. You're sourcing it through AWS. You're sourcing it through GCP. And that was a super successful strategy.
So you had mentioned before, just stepping back, as you said, there are some deals that are not appropriate to go through marketplaces. So give us an example of one of those.
Well, I think it's not necessarily is the deal appropriate. It is what's the easiest path for your buyer. And, that should, for me, that's the guiding light as a lifelong seller is, hey, how do we make this easy for you? Now, sometimes as the seller, I'm educating you as the buyer on why this is the easy path.
Right.
I call that the advanced jujitsu class, and not if you don't know anything about marketplace, but once you start to, kind of understand how these things work, you can actually be a strong advocate for your buyer and, turn them on to different ways to procure you. But, you could walk in and, your prospect doesn't have spend with a cloud provider, doesn't have a relationship with any one of the cloud providers yet, then there's not going to be a ton of advantage there. To be gained. There's other paths for you to sell to them that are going to be easier. So the other things are some of the motions, especially in a product led. Now I can argue marketplaces can be great for a product led motion. A lot of the product led motions, however, start on that software provider's web property. Right? They want you there. They want to start you as a free trial, and then they want to convert you. Well, the acquisition part, maybe happening directly, is fine. The expansion part where it turns into real dollars, that transaction makes a lot of sense for marketplace. And so it's just really dependent on kind of, again, where's your buyer coming from? A little dependent on what's your own selling motion. If you got a super strong motion where you're, starting everybody out native on your property, don't disrupt that, but think about how do I convert that faster and how do I expand it farther?
But also thinking, and if you have insight into this, is somebody's, CMO is looking to buy some sort of marketing automation tool. They say, okay, well, I'm going to go talk to the person that owns, AWS inside the company.
Yeah.
So what's that process look like for the CMO then to say, I want in.
Yeah.
I want to take part of our consumption budget.
Yeah.
What sort of justification does there usually have to be internally, and that maybe sellers have to help with to help the CMO make that case? Or is it usually there's so much room that it's fluid enough that that's not really the issue?
Yeah, and I don't think there's a blanket, one size fits all answer to that one. I think it is highly dependent on each organization. So, some organizations may control those cloud dollars pretty tightly. Others may not. We see a lot of fluidity there. I think where, one angle that we haven't really explored here is the reps at the cloud providers. So let's say, the organization that, I at Tackle am trying to sell to is, Nike, right? And Nike does a bunch of business with AWS. And I'm selling, let's say Tackle was a marketing company. I'm selling that marketing tool. One of the things I'm going to want to do is figure out, I'll ask my buyer, hey, do you guys have a good relationship with any one of the cloud providers? They may say no, they may say yeah, whatever. Another avenue you have to go is go work with the sales team, go work with the rep at AWS who sells to Nike. And say, hey, I'm working on a deal here. By the way, when that deal gets fulfilled through the marketplace, that rep at AWS gets paid. So there's some joint benefit here. And so that rep goes, hey, I'm the one who's talking to the CIO about how much budget they should spend with us. Why don't I include this in part of that spend? Now you're working the system, right? And so again, as a salesperson, I want speed to deal. I want as much budget and I want as many angles to win as possible.
And to your point, one of your discovery questions is, who's the rep you work with at AWS, GCP, and so on?
Well, and the beauty of it is, as a software provider, each one of these cloud providers gives you a facility to register your deals with them. And registering a deal with a cloud provider does not bind you to doing a deal through that cloud provider. It just gives them visibility, like, hey, you're there. And so when you register deals, you typically get unlocked, back to you. Hey, here's the team that's working with that company. And now you can collaborate together and co-sell is the motion you really want to get to. You want to. A lot of that is on you as a software provider to go find that first. But once you start selling more and more and more, it becomes oh, wait, hang on a minute. This company sells a lot of software. My customer over here bought it. I got 10 more customers. Let's be strategic.
Yeah. And once you have that, then it starts looking more like, though not exactly, more like a channel sale.
It does.
Right. So, yeah. Interesting. Yeah, I like that. Very cool. Well, Don, thank you for spending time with us.
Yeah, I really enjoyed it. Like I said, it's I can talk shop all day long when it comes to helping people sell. So,
well, I think we'll have you back on. We'll talk more about it because this is not enough's being said about it. So yeah, we want to explore it more and learn more about it. So yeah, thank you for coming on.
Yeah, fantastic. I'd love to do it, and it's great.
And if people want to connect with you, what's the best way to do that?
Best way to do it, you can find me on LinkedIn. That's probably the fastest path because my email these days, like everybody else, is clogged up with a bunch of software solutions and SDRs trying to sell me stuff. So I typically more substantive things going via LinkedIn.
Right. And your LinkedIn inbox hasn't got to that point yet either, huh?
I mean, it's getting there. But if you're, we're growing like crazy. We grew from 50 employees at the start of last year to over 200 this year, and so we're growing across every avenue. So LinkedIn's a great place to hit me.
All right, perfect. All right, Don, thank you.
Thanks so much, Andy.
Okay, friends, that's it for this episode. First of all, I want to thank you for taking the time to listen. As always, I'm so grateful for your support of the show, and I want to thank my guest, Don Addington, for sharing his insights with us today. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe to this podcast, Sales Enablement with Andy Paul, on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts. So thank you for your help with that. And as always, thank you so much for investing your time with me today. Until next time, I'm your host, Andy Paul. Good selling, everyone.